Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello. Welcome back to the Natural Super Kids podcast. Jessica Donovan here. And today I am speaking to a guest, Sonya Reynolds, who is a nutritionist. And the subject we're going to be talking about today is epilepsy in children. So it's quite a specific one. And I know this is not going to be of interest to everyone. Although, if you're anything like me, you like to listen to all kinds of topics that might not relate to you, but you never know when these things are going to come up in your life, or whether, someone is going to be going through something that you can send them information on. So that is my hope with this episode, that it gets passed on to give parents of kids that have been diagnosed with epilepsy some different complementary strategies and ideas that they might want to think about. Now, this episode and chat with Sonya came about because I referred one of our club members onto Sonya after she shared that her little baby has just been diagnosed with epilepsy. And Sonya replied or got in touch with me and thanked me for the referral. And so I said, would you like to come and talk about this on the podcast, because it is a subject that I think will interest a lot of people. So we talk about all kinds of things related to epilepsy. Sonya has become an expert in epilepsy, and she's a qualified nutritionist. Her daughter was diagnosed with epilepsy, and she shares a little bit more about that story. So she's been on a personal journey and learned a lot when it comes to medications and side effects and complementary therapies and nutrition specifically, dietary changes that can help. And we even talk a little bit about medicinal cannabis as well. So I am going to hand it over to Sonya to share all things about epilepsy in kids with us. Welcome to the podcast, Sonya.
Thanks for having me, Jess. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be chatting to you today. So can you start by telling us a bit about your story and how you came to be a specialist in epilepsy?
Yes, I never expected to become a specialist in epilepsy. However, my firstborn daughter, who's now 12 and a half, at 3 and a half, was diagnosed with a sudden onset, very aggressive epilepsy. So we had this, I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I'm still figuring out, how to be a mum of 2. And all of a sudden, my daughter started having seizures one night, and they didn't look like a typical seizure. And I think it's really important to know that, about 60% of people don't necessarily present with what we think of as a seizure. And then what happened was we had multiple drug failures. We just could not get her seizures under control. And hers was, as I said, a very aggressive one called ESES. So basically the majority of her brain waves were in that status epilepticus, which means that she didn't come out of seizures really in her sleep, even though they were subclinical, so you couldn't see them. So I had to pick up all the pieces after multiple drug failures and probably my own sort of, I wouldn't call it a breakdown, but definitely struggling with my own mental health and looking after a child with additional needs. And then what we did is we went on a journey of figuring out, well, what can we do to give my daughter the best quality of life? And as a result, and this is not relevant for everyone, but she's no longer classified as epileptic.
That's incredible. And I imagine, all of the learning that you went through in that whole process would have been amazing. And that's why I'm so excited to tap into your knowledge today. So can you tell us a little bit more about epilepsy and the different ways that it can present in children?
Yeah, so as I said earlier, about 60% of people can have a focal seizure, and that can look more like daydreaming. And they can say intoxication in an adult. So that's sort of that daydreaming. And then there's like myoclonic and tonic-clonic, so those big generalized seizures, if you will, the ones that you see in the movies.
Yeah.
And so what that means is it's like the whole brain versus one part of it, I guess is how you would describe a focal seizure. And then the thing about epilepsy is that it's not just the fact that you're having the seizure, Jess, it's the fact that it can cause damage to the brain if left untreated. So that's where it becomes really tricky, because you can end up on multiple medications. So it is common for people to have about 2 medications to stop the seizures, but it's when you're getting into these multiple drug fails and these kids, I'm saying kids, but kids never coming out of these seizures, that's where the real issues come. And so my daughter, although no longer classified as epileptic, has moderate intellectual disability because of the damage of the seizures. Remembering they were very intense. This isn't this isn't going to happen to everyone by any means, but it means that she's still learning to read and write at 12.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's important to understand, isn't it? And that's really what the medication is trying to do, isn't it? Is to get those seizures under control.
Yeah, and I think there's that whole there can be this very black and white, like medication bad, we don't need to take medication. But I think that was something that I really had to learn. We didn't have a choice, basically. We felt so overwhelmed and she was so sick that when you don't know what you're doing as well, you've got to trust these amazing neurologists and doctors that have so much more experience than us, Jess. So you've kind of got to go along with it. But in the same token, what we can do as practitioners, like as what I do, is that I then support those parents who have chosen to take the medication. And as I said, there's no judgment. You're doing what's right and safe for your child.
Yes, such a good point. And I think, what we can offer naturopathically, nutritionally can really complement what, modern medicine and medications are trying to achieve as well. So I think, that's a really important point that, that it can be complementary. It should be complementary.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about diet and nutrition, because this is one of the, fascinating areas and really promising areas when it comes to epilepsy. So what are some of the key diet and nutrition considerations in children with epilepsy?
Where I wanted to go first is there's so much that's not understood about epilepsy and seizures. And Cindy O'Meara said a really great quote that she sees that seizures are like flushing out the brain, and to think of it that way, and that's always stayed with me. And when you look at the literature, which is what I've done because I've become such a specialist, is that so in some studies, what they found, about half of those kids were celiacs. And when they removed the gluten, so remembering celiac is an autoimmune condition related to gluten, when they removed the gluten, and the sooner they did it to when seizures commenced, the better, they could stop the seizures. Now, that was a small cohort, it wasn't a huge sample size, but it was in humans and it was in children. So I think that's a really good first place to start, right? You're not going to be gluten deficient. There's no such thing. That's right. But what we do like carbohydrates for our kids, for growing kids. But number one is you could potentially be looking for the celiac gene. Is a really great way to rule out if you have celiacs or not. What else I would look at is going very low allergen, so removing things like dairy. And I take this seriously, Jess, as I'm sure you do. Like, we don't just take everyone off everything. Like, we have a really good conversation around the benefit of removing dairy is that it can cause inflammation. And there is that whole casomorphine sensitivity where they've got that sensitivity to the protein in dairy. So I think of those kids as being like the little canaries that we need in the gold mine, that we, these are the people that probably can't be eating all the things. So eating as naturally as possible is definitely number one. Then when we talk about something like the ketogenic diet for epilepsy, that's much more serious, because what they're doing is they're changing the macronutrients so that it's higher in fat and lower in carbs. And if you go to the hospital and do a ketogenic diet for epilepsy, unfortunately, what they'll do is they'll go very old school and say you need to have 90% fat and then that last 10% is your carbs and protein. And they accidentally found that, Jess. I don't know if you know that they accidentally stumbled on this, that it stopped seizures. So it had always been, from the 5th century, they used fasting as part of reducing seizures because it mimics, so ketogenic diet mimics fasting, and that's why it creates ketones, which are anti-inflammatory. But what we've done is we've gone and done like the very strict ketogenic diet, which is very difficult, has lots of side effects, But what we know now is that you can still get really great results on the modified Atkins diet.
Which is easier to follow, right?
It's easier to follow. Exactly. So about half the people that were put on, can I say MAD, the MAD diet, modified Atkins diet, MAD, half the people that were put on MAD had a halving of their seizures. So half the people that did the modified Atkins diet had a halving of seizures. So that's amazing information for us as practitioners and patients.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because yes, there's a lot of promising research about the ketogenic diet and epilepsy, but putting a child on the ketogenic diet, as you said, it's not easy. And also it kind of goes against, the kids are growing and developing and they need those kind of carbohydrates and protein. So I'm really glad that you've brought that up, that there's sort of a compromise and in between with something like the modified Atkins diet. So would that be something you would jump to for most of your clients with epilepsy, or is it more complicated than that?
That's a great question. It's more complicated than that. It's also about the mental load of that family, remembering that, us mamas are usually the ones that are, and that's a general, term, but we're carrying that. And if you have to be really mentally prepared to do this. But if you do a ketogenic diet with your child, you absolutely have to go through the hospital system. I'm not advocating that for anyone to do without
at home on their own without any support.
100%, because there are side effects like kidney stones. But number one, what we did was we did that very classical keto, and we did get seizure reduction, which was phenomenal. But what happened was, with the lack of protein, my daughter's hair started falling out. And I'm like, there's got to be a better way. And this is before keto was as well known as it is now. Like, Australia's always a couple of years behind the US. And so now we're up to where the US is. And what I would do with parents that were interested in this is that there's also evidence for low glycemic index treatment. So I think there's lots of grey there, Jess. You don't have to go, okay, I'm cutting out all carbs, I'm cutting out, or, I'm just loading up in fat. What you can do is you can increase the protein, look at the quality of the carbs, and add in some good fats and see where you land as well.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, particularly to, if you get a diagnosis like epilepsy for a child, that is overwhelming in itself. And then having to make these huge dietary changes that are not easy, just removing gluten is even really tough for a lot of families. Yeah, so I love that you've kind of made that a bit more realistic, that there is that sort of gray area. Okay, let's move on to talking about some medications, because as you said, you've been through quite a journey with medications for your daughter's epilepsy. Can you go through some of the common medications that are prescribed for epilepsy, how they work in the body, and some of the side effects?
Yes. So generally, medications are doing one or two things. So they're either decreasing the excitation, so that firing. If we think of, I'm on a video with Jess and I'm doing all these hand movements. Isn't very helpful. So it's that excitation, it's that glutamate, which is that neurotransmitter that fires, if you will. And then the other way medications work is that they enhance inhibition, so dampening down of everything. So one's stopping the firing and one's enhancing the inhibition. The thing about that is that there can be a lot of nutrition deficiencies that are influenced by medications. And so what we need to know as parents is, what are some of the known side effects? That is very easy to find. So folate, so B9 is a really big one for, say, Tegretol, which is one of those old school anti-epileptics. Epilem's the same. It's one of the first line treatments that they'll usually use with our kids. And that has a known depletion in folate. And folate's really important for how our cells replicate, how we detoxify, our neurotransmitters. So we really need to be looking at those nutrient deficiencies as part of that medication protocol. Keppra is a really well-known anti-epileptic that's known to deplete B6. What you'll find, it's usually the mood stuff, Jess. So they'll be really angry. And, I had a 3.5-year-old that was just out of control, angry. And yeah, their mood's just really difficult. And we chose to change medication. So just because I'm saying medications are okay, some medications don't suit your child. And so you have to be the advocate for saying, you know what, this isn't right. What are my alternatives? But at the same time, knowing that there are things that we can be doing alongside. So as I said, we had my daughter on Keppra for a number of years, and we always supplemented with B6 to support that mood.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. Those kind of mood and behavioural challenges that can, it can be mistaken for, well, is this just part of the epilepsy? Is this because of the developmental stage they're in? Are they toddlers? Are they teenagers? So yeah, repletion of a lot of those nutrients is really important. So for any mums that are listening that might not have that kind of one-on-one support, do you think just starting with some sort of a good quality multivitamin to make sure all of those nutrients are going in is a good start?
Yeah, I love that, Jess. I think I would be saying, a good quality multivitamin that has some active Bs. We don't want folic acid. So something like folinic, or I generally use folinic acid in kids. Jess, I don't necessarily go straight to the more active form. So I also think about B vitamins, as you say, getting a multivitamin, because B vitamins are like a symphony. They work better together. So folates and B12s and B6 should all together. And then zinc and magnesium are like your calming minerals, which help turn things on and off. So what we find is that they when I say they turn things on and off, it's that enzymatic reactions that are happening in our body. And I find a lot of these kids are low in zinc. There's that fussy eater picture as well. And interestingly, they know that epileptics are generally lower in magnesium than the general population. So magnesium baths are really beautiful from any age, and it's low cost. It's actually something, obviously we've got to think, okay, if they're having seizures, you've actually got to be very careful around water. So acknowledging that could be something that you need to be there if you're, having a bath, the child is having a bath. But magnesium, zinc and B vitamins are really important to kind of get right. I think with zinc, I always tell my patients, don't supplement zinc by yourself. I think there's things that can happen when you do, but I think magnesium and B vitamins are really safe and really supportive.
Yeah, definitely. And they're, really important nutrients overall to kids' well-being, for mood, for behavior. And magnesium just makes so much sense, doesn't it? When there's all of that kind of increase in activity, then magnesium can just sort of calm things down. Obviously, it's not going to be the one and only thing that helps to address epilepsy, but yeah, magnesium and epilepsy together definitely makes sense to me.
Yeah. And I think what you'll find is, even if some of these kids, their muscles can feel really, really tight, and I think when you add in the magnesium, you'll physically notice the relaxation of those muscles. And something else that's really important that I haven't talked about is the gut-brain connection.
Yes, let's talk about that for sure.
Oh my gosh, so important. So I use clinically trialed probiotics. One of my favorites is Lactobacillus rhamnosus LGG.
I'm always talking about
LGG.
LGG.
And the reason that I use it is because a couple of reasons, but I like to call it like the bossy probiotic. It tells the other guys what to do.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. And then the other thing that it's been shown to help with is allergies and intolerances. So if there is this sort of underlying allergy or trigger of inflammation in the body, it's a really good start to kind of support the microbiome. There are, without going into it, but I would be testing for certain things as well and deciding, what was most important. But I think you can't go wrong with a good clinically trialed probiotic.
Yes. And I was going to say, I recommend LGG for a lot of those allergy kind of kids and kids with atopic conditions like eczema. And yeah, that gut brain connection, it makes so much sense to look after the microbiome when there's a brain disorder going on. So I love that you brought that up as well. And obviously there's a lot of things that we can do in a child's diet to support their gut health. And we've talked a lot about these kinds of strategies on the podcast before as well. So thank you for bringing that up. So just in terms of the side effects of the medications, obviously there's a lot of them. So starting with some of those nutrients is important. Is there anything else you would recommend in that respect?
The side effects, yeah, look, as you say, it's tricky to figure out, well, why is my child behaving this way? Is it because of this or all that? The good news is that you can potentially supplement at the right dose and you can see if that helps. I would be, in terms of side effects, I'd really be having a conversation with the doctor, with very specific ones for your medication. 2 years, my daughter did 2 years of steroids because where her epilepsy was in her brain at night basically was in her language center. And the sicker she got, she basically lost all language, Jess. So when your child has gone from neurotypical 3.5-year-old to a nonverbal 5-year-old, you're going to use a really strong medication like a steroid because we didn't even know if we'd get her language back. So we had to go, okay, we know the side effects there for steroids and bone health. And we had to make that very hard decision around doing it or not. So what we've done, we obviously stopped that medication, but also what we did was we always made sure that she was exercising like this. And it's difficult when your child is very sick. They're not exercising, Jess. They're not going to a dance class.
No, I'm sure they're feeling pretty kind of flat.
Yeah. Or if they're having so many seizures that they can't do an activity. So for me, depending on where your child's at, things like exercise as part of managing those side effects and, physiotherapy, like all those allied health practitioners that, my daughter sees an occupational therapist twice a week and a speech therapist twice a week. So using those therapists to support those side effects as well.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's just it's just a really good example of how you just need to look at each child individually. And, depending on exactly what medications they're on and what their signs and symptoms are, everyone needs to be treated individually, don't they? Which is what naturopathy is all about,
That's what we do so good. Yeah.
Exactly. So is there anything else you'd like to say or any words of reassurance that you would give to parents listening that are challenged with a diagnosis of epilepsy in their family?
Number one thing is keep looking for answers. So, for example, we were lucky enough to be unlucky, but at the insurgence of medical cannabis all came to the forefront when Imogen was particularly sick. And so we were at the coalface of this new movement and we rode that. And, we've used the special access scheme to access medical cannabis for my daughter with amazing results. So number one is don't just give, it's hard to say don't give up when, I don't think what I find is that these parents are the ultimate warriors. They're out trying to find all the answers. Yeah. So I think don't give up and don't just say, okay, this is the medication. It's not working. Oh, well, like I think that number one, like there can be answers elsewhere. Number two is, finding an advocate or finding someone that can support you. Because what sometimes people are saying to me is, no one's listening to me, or I don't understand what's the right answer. Everyone's just saying different things. So having someone in your corner that can help you navigate the medical side as well as doing the complementary side is really beneficial. And ask for help, like outsource, ask for help. Like someone says, what can I do for you? Take the meal, take the washing. Like it's a bit like having a newborn, just whatever anyone offers, it's hard to do, but take it.
Yeah, such good advice. And I think, I love that you said, find someone to advocate for you, because when you're going to specialist appointments, it can be quite intimidating and you've got such a short amount of time and like you kind of told all the information. And also, from my personal experience, it's, this expectation that you'll do exactly what the specialist says, there's no questioning or, so having an advocate that can kind of look at all of the information and support you is really important. So I love that. Okay. Can you tell us a little bit more about where people can find out more about you?
Yes. So if people would like to find out more about me, I work at Studio U in Birch Grove in Sydney. I see clients online and in person. So if I'm seeing people in person, they might like to come to Birch Grove. Otherwise, I see lots of my clients on Zoom, which is one thing that COVID really gave us, was people being like open to doing more Zooms. So my personal website is Sonya Reynolds, and that's Sonya with a Y, Reynolds with a Y, sonyareynolds.com.au. And if people want to hear me have a chat about my history with my daughter, I've got a podcast on there, and I've written some articles around ketogenic diet, modified Atkins, and other topics that could be supportive and, a little bit of a starting point for people if they're just starting this journey.
Perfect. And I'll make sure that I pop all the links in the show notes. So if anyone wants to be able to find Sonya and all of these helpful resources easily, head on over to the show notes and you'll be able to link across from there. Thank you so much for joining me for a chat. It's been really nice to get, I guess, tap into your wisdom today. So thank you.
Thanks, Jess. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.